On what seems like an all too regular occurrence, every time I want to go and buy some new rolling stock for the railway, it's either out of stock or not available in the colour that you want. So I end up scouring eBay and various model shops to see what is available. Most of the time I can find stuff that's not the colour that I want and is relatively cheap because nobody else wants it either, or broken or damaged vehicle. So that's what we're doing today, a colour change on some Bachmann GUVs. I found some green ones that were relatively cheap. When I say cheap, less than half of the current recommended retail price. I've collected 5 of these vehicles over the last 18 months or so in various states of disrepair. So unwittingly, I've created another little sanctuary for broken and unloved Bachmann GUVs, pretty similar to my sanctuary for Mazak Rot 31s, putting me in a similar club to Brian and his obsession with GUV Class 40s, and Mr. Nichols' unhealthy alliance with everything Lima. The vehicle's broken down into their constituent parts, i.e. the roof, body, bogies, wheels. Time to give them a little bit of a bath to get rid of all the grease, goo and as much of the factory applied paint as we possibly can. This was done in a nice big vat of 99.9% proof isopropyl alcohol. I may do an independent video on stripping the bodies using this method in a separate video. Once they were in the liquid, I left them for about 2 or 3 hours and then went back to it, and it had already discoloured the liquid. Then I rubbed them clean with a toothbrush and everything came off. Factory applied paint, decals, goo, scum, the lot. Once I was happy with the descaling, I then took all the parts and put them in a neutralising bath of just warm, soapy water. Let them to dry naturally. Going to be using acrylic paints again for the first half of this video, and going to start off with the bogies and a nice coat of not black. The bogies didn't get the alcohol treatment because they're not painted. They come just as plastic from the manufacturer. So they only had the soapy bath. You can tell the difference between the painted one on the top and the not painted one on the bottom, which looks a little bit plasticky. The top one has got a very nice base coat of paint. For the bodies, I decided to use a primer. I wouldn't normally, but I was unsure about the coverage of the paint that I was going to use, so I thought it best just to neutralise everything, make everything grey. I suppose what I should have done was tried different colour primers. There's black, white and grey on the market. It would have been a nice experiment to see how the paint that I'm going to use next covers each of the different colour primers. I might do that in a different video because I've got some more similar type vehicles to do, so that might well happen in the next one. The paints that I'm going to be using in this video are from MIG by Ammo by MIG, and somebody's got them to produce some British Railways colours, i.e. this packet is the diesel colours. I'll leave a link in the description below for where I got them from, the rail centre. So I didn't use any thinners at all. It was straight out of the bottle, straight into the airbrush. Putting the first coat on, it seemed to cover really well, and I was really pleased with the way it applied to the model. After the second coat went down, I was a little concerned about the colour. It seemed to be a little bit bright, so I put it up against the Bachmann coach just to compare the colour of the blues. And it was a little bit light. I'm sure that could be addressed by a blacker or darker undercoat primer. I only stripped the paint off of one of the roofs. The rest of them seemed to be okay, good enough to just apply paint onto the top, which was one coat of NATO black, followed by some striping using some neutral grey. I decanted some NATO black into a little pot, and what was left over from the neutral grey was then poured into that pot to make a slightly lighter NATO black. That was then applied across the whole of the top of the roof just to blend everything in very easily in a really thin coat. This makes the striping disappear mostly, but that's okay because what the effect I was trying to get was not a great big block of colour, so it's broken up into a nice uneven coat. When it comes to decals or transfers, there's so many different ways of applying them, whether it's with just solutions or whether you put down a gloss coat varnish, whatever it is. And if it, the only thing I can say really is if it works, it's the correct way to do it. That's because there's so many variables. It's who manufactured the decals, what surface are you putting it on, what is your intended finished product going to be. There's just too many variables just to say this is the way you have to do it. The only common feature that I've found with decals is to finish off, you've got to seal them in with a flat coat varnish or gloss varnish, depending on what sort of finish you're looking for on the model. So a little bit of history. 907 of these vehicles were built in the late 1950s, early 1960s, including the prototype 86500. The majority were built at the Press Steel factory at Linwood in Scotland. The remainder, which I think is 155 vehicles, were built at British Railway workshops at York, Glasgow and Doncaster. A handful of them are still in regular use, although heavily modified from their original concept, like this one, which is regularly in one of the trains that I drive. Putting these things back together, I've just got to point out one thing, that I took one of the handrails out where the Express Parcels logo goes. That's because it goes underneath and it's really difficult to thread under. Broke a paintbrush out to finish off the detail work, including the handrails, chalkboards and the handbrake wheel. I could have stopped there because they do look all right. However, they also look a little bit too clean for my liking, so it's back onto the bench to make them look a bit more work-stained. So I use a control for this one, and that will be an out-of-the-box model that's not been weathered in any way whatsoever. I'll do the following process with just two colours, beige and not black, enamel paints by Revel. Thinned down to probably 60% thinners to 40% paint, so it comes out of the airbrush like a mist. I started off doing the underframe and the lower body sides with the beige sort of brake dust colour. Then with the darker black colour, it was mostly on the ends and the top of the body side, blending the roof into the body. And if you're thinking that it looks a complete mess at the moment, you're probably right, because I thought so too. But that's only half of the process. The next stage is to wipe most of what we've just put on off. Using a flat brush that's damp with thinners, it's up and down strokes to simulate gravity and rain that washes all of that goo and grime downwards. Instead of using a clean brush, I used one that had been dipped into a black wash to clean the handbrake wheel. Because memory serves me correctly, they were filthy and you covered in crap. Same brush, same dark wash to pick out the panel lines around the doors, the grills and on the bogies. At this stage I was not exactly happy with the result that had turned out, so I had to get a little bit of cloth, that was actually a handkerchief, damp with thinners and then wiped a little bit more of the weathering off. I did half of one so you can see the difference between done and not done. I also did a pin wash on the door recesses, panel lines and around some of the raised detail like the hinges and also the air vents on the lower half of the body side. This darkens all the recesses up a bit and makes everything a little bit more prominent, easier to see. It also gives that effect of multiple layers of dirt, grease and grime, something which factory weathered models really lack. My favourite weathering powder next, which is Track Rust, on some of the bogie tops. Not all of them, otherwise they'll look all the same. Final thing I did with the bogies was use another one of my favourite paints, which is Humbrol Metal Coat 27004, and then just dry brush that all over the raised areas with a nice, well, old flat brush. This technique isn't really that obvious until after the paint's dried, which with this metal coat you can actually rub it with your finger and get a really nice metallic sheen with it. I've got another one of these spare, and it's an out of the box model, so I thought we'd have a look at that and then just to compare the enhancements that we've done, just to make sure that we've actually done something. So this one with its plasticky looking bogies and its unpainted metal wheels against the one that we've just finished weathering. As you can see, all the raised detail is been brought to the fore and is really distinct. Again, on our weathered model, we can see the panel lines are really deep and dark. I don't know how I've managed to break a window. If we have a little bit of a closer look, we can see that all the dirt and grime has collected around all the raised details, just like it should. Unlike our out-of-the-box model, that just seems a little bit flat and boring. Once the pin wash had dried, even the battery box stood out, and I really like that little effect. I've got both of them end to end, and this really does show the difference between a out-of-the-box model and a weathered model, even if it is repainted. My concerns about the lightness of the blue paint has also been dismissed. Onto the layout and into revenue earning service, we've got them in what I would call a proper van train. I'm just in the process of laying some foundations, pun intended, for a video about carriage washers, in which we'll discuss, if I remember, why these GUV vehicles and the CCT cousins get so filthy. That's in the future. For now, I'll have to sign off. Well, sign on actually, because I've got to go and drive a real train. Thanks for watching. See you next time.